Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. The Silent Hours. It began, like most horrors, on an ordinary night. My great-aunt had passed away the week before, leaving behind her crumbling Victorian home on the outskirts of town. I was tasked with sorting through her belongings, as the only remaining family member in this forgotten place. It wasn't a job I wanted, but the house was mine now, along with everything in it. I should have felt fortunate, an inheritance like this. Instead, all I felt was a knot of dread in my stomach, something I couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the house itself, standing so tall and lonely in the moonlight, its windows like empty eyes. The creak of the front door echoed in the hallway as I stepped inside. Dust filled the air, and the smell of decay clung to every surface. Her collection of porcelain dolls greeted me from every shelf, their glassy eyes reflecting the dim light from my flashlight. There were dozens of them, some seated daintily on wooden chairs, others posed in corners or lined up in cabinets. Their fragile faces seemed to follow me as I moved deeper into the house, an unsettling sensation that I brushed off as my imagination. I worked for hours that evening, sorting through papers and old books, until the clock struck midnight. The chime was low and mournful, and I froze when I heard it, 12 slow, deep tolls from the grandfather clock in the hallway. Each chime echoed off the walls, louder than it should have been in the stillness of the house. I turned toward the clock, wondering if it had been wound recently, or if it was running on some last breath of energy, but as I passed the dolls, I noticed something strange. Their heads had moved. I stopped dead in my tracks. The dolls, the ones whose eyes had seemed so lifeless, were now turned slightly, their faces angled toward me. My heart leapt into my throat. Surely, it had to be a trick of the light, or maybe I had bumped the shelf without realizing it. But no, none of the shelves had been touched, and the dolls were facing me, their once neutral expressions now watchful. My breath quickened. I walked back, waving the flashlight across them, but they didn't budge. "You're losing it, Evan," I muttered to myself. But the unease didn't fade. Then, just as I turned to head upstairs, something soft brushed against my ankle. I jumped, my heart racing, and shone the light downward. A small doll, one I hadn't noticed before, lay on the floor. Its blank eyes stared up at me, its arm outstretched as though it had just reached for me. I swallowed hard and hurried to the stairs, unwilling to look back. My mind was playing tricks on me, I told myself, but deep down I knew something was wrong in this house. Something very wrong. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. I bolted up the stairs, the old wood groaning beneath my feet. Each step felt heavier, like something was dragging me back. The narrow staircase seemed to stretch on forever, every shadow clawing at me as if the house itself was shifting in the dark. When I reached the top, I stopped to catch my breath, the silence oppressive. The house, once quiet in a decaying way, now felt alive. I stood outside the door to the master bedroom, my hand trembling as it hovered over the brass handle. I didn't want to go in. Something was urging me to leave, to turn around, run down those stairs, and never look back. But I had a job to do. I was the one who had to face whatever lurked here. Slowly, I pushed the door open, and the faint light of my flashlight revealed a room frozen in time. Great-Aunt Margaret's room was cluttered with ancient furniture, lace-covered chairs, and even more dolls, sitting in rows on every available surface. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in dusty, faded curtains. But it wasn't the furniture or the suffocating stillness that caught my attention. No, it was the murmuring. A low, almost imperceptible whisper, coming from somewhere in the room. "Hello?" I whispered, though I regretted it immediately. My voice was swallowed by the gloom. The whispers continued, hushed, like dozens of tiny voices speaking in unison just beneath my hearing. I scanned the room, and my light fell on the dolls. Their expressions seemed to change with each flicker of my beam, their faces warping in the dark. Some appeared almost pleased. I could swear they were whispering to each other. My throat went dry, and I stumbled back, hitting a small table by the bed. A photograph tumbled to the floor. I bent down to pick it up, my hand shaking. It was a picture of my great-aunt, younger, maybe in her 20s. She stood outside the house, smiling. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, there was something, or someone, barely visible, a figure with pale skin and hollow eyes. A shadow that seemed too real, too detailed for an old photograph. A shiver ran down my spine, and I shoved the photo into my pocket. I didn't want to look at it any longer. My fingers brushed against something cold as I pushed myself off the table, a doll, perched too close to the edge. It fell to the ground with a clatter, and I swore I heard it hiss. "I need to leave," I whispered to myself. But as I turned toward the door, I saw it, the pale figure from the photo, standing at the far end of the room, just by the window. Its face was obscured, but its outline was unmistakable. Thin, almost skeletal, its head tilted in a way that made my stomach churn. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I felt its presence pressing down on me, choking the air out of the room. I blinked, and the figure was gone, as if it had never been there. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind spinning, before forcing myself out of the room. The hallway seemed darker now, and the whispers grew louder behind me, filling the space like a rising tide. I didn't dare look back. The house was watching me. I could feel it in every step, in every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Whatever was here wasn't going to let me leave so easily. I descended the stairs quickly, the weight of unseen eyes on my back growing heavier with every step. My hands gripped the banister tightly, knuckles white. When I reached the bottom, the air seemed different, thicker, colder. The dolls hadn't moved again, at least not that I could see. But the house had shifted. It felt alive in a way that defied logic, its very structure pressing in on me, a looming presence in every wall and corner. I glanced toward the hallway, toward the clock that had chimed at midnight. It stood there, tall and unblinking, its face frozen at 12. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself that I could finish sorting through the house quickly and get out. But that hope was dashed when I noticed something new. The cellar door was open. I had passed it earlier, tightly shut, and now it stood ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling out into the hall. There was no reason for me to go down there. My task was upstairs, in the main rooms, and the idea of venturing into the cellar filled me with dread. Yet, some force, curiosity, fear, or perhaps the house itself, drew me toward it. My hand brushed against the cold wood of the door as I peeked inside. The stairs creaked as though they hadn't been used in years, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and mildew. I could feel something waiting down there. Something I wasn't prepared to face. Against all better judgment, I stepped inside and began my descent. The cellar was unlike the rest of the house, darker, colder, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. My flashlight flickered as I reached the bottom, the weak beam barely cutting through the shadows. The stone walls were damp, and the space felt impossibly large, far larger than the house itself should allow. In the distance, I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like nails dragging against stone. I paused, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but my feet moved forward, drawn toward the sound. There, at the far end of the cellar, something caught the light, an old wooden chest, its surface scarred and battered. It didn't belong here. It was too old, too worn, and the symbols etched into its surface were unfamiliar. I crouched down, running my hand over the rough wood, feeling the strange carvings beneath my fingers. The air grew colder the closer I got to the chest, and the whispers returned, louder this time, almost demanding. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lid. Every part of me screamed not to open it. But something deeper, a morbid curiosity, perhaps, compelled me. I lifted the lid slowly, the ancient wood groaning in protest. Inside, there were more dolls. But these were different, older, more grotesque. Their faces were twisted, malformed, some with missing limbs, others with too many. They lay in a tangled heap, as though they had been abandoned long ago. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my hand. I jerked back, seeing a deep cut across my palm, blood dripping onto the floor. But it wasn't the cut that horrified me. It was the doll at the top of the pile, the one whose porcelain fingers were coated in my blood. Its face, once blank, now bore a malicious grin, its eyes gleaming with life. I stumbled back, the cellar spinning around me. The walls seemed to close in, the whispers growing louder, frantic. The dolls in the chest began to twitch, their tiny limbs jerking in unnatural movements. My blood had awakened something ancient and malevolent. I turned to run, but the cellar door slammed shut above me, trapping me in the dark with the now moving mass of dolls. I wasn't alone down here anymore. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled toward the stairs, heart hammering in my chest. The cold seeped through the walls, freezing my skin as I fumbled for the door, desperate to escape. But the door wouldn't budge. I pushed and pulled, but it remained locked, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. The whispers were deafening now, circling around me in a storm of voices, too many to make sense of. And beneath it all, a low, rhythmic tapping echoed from the chest, like fingers drumming on wood. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The dolls, every last one, were upright now. Some were crawling, their porcelain limbs clattering against the stone floor, while others stood, their eyes wide, faces twisted in sinister grins. The doll that had cut me was the closest, its tiny hand still dripping with my blood. It cocked its head, as if mocking me, and took a step forward. I backed away, nearly tripping over the uneven floor, my body trembling in terror. "Stay away!" I shouted, though my voice sounded weak, as if swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. I swung the flashlight wildly, its beam barely cutting through the darkness. The dolls advanced, relentless, their twisted bodies moving with unnatural speed. Behind them, from the shadows near the chest, I saw it. A figure, barely visible at first, rising from the darkness like something out of a nightmare. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs grotesquely long and jointed in ways that defied anatomy. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a hollow, gaping void, blacker than the surrounding darkness. I could feel its gaze on me, even though it had no eyes. It stood behind the advancing dolls, watching, waiting. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat as the figure raised a hand and pointed toward me. The dolls surged forward, their tiny hands reaching out, grabbing at my legs, pulling at my clothes. I kicked and thrashed, trying to shake them off, but they were everywhere. One of them latched onto my ankle, its grip impossibly strong, and I fell, hitting the cold stone floor with a thud. They swarmed me, their glassy eyes filled with malevolence, their sharp fingers digging into my skin. I fought with everything I had, kicking and punching at the dolls, but there were too many. The air was filled with the sound of their laughter, high-pitched and echoing off the walls. My flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering to the ground, and plunged the room into darkness. But in that darkness, I saw the figure again, closer now, its hollow face inches from mine. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. A voice, deep and ancient, whispered in my ear. "The blood calls to us." I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. The figure reached out, its hand cold as death, and touched my chest. The world around me seemed to twist and warp, and for a moment, everything was silent. The dolls froze, their laughter cut off abruptly. The whispers stopped. And then, the pain came. It was as though fire coursed through my veins, burning me from the inside out. My body convulsed, my vision blurring as I was pulled deeper into the darkness. The figure leaned closer, its hollow face almost touching mine, and whispered again, "You belong to us now." Everything went black. When I awoke, I was still in the cellar, but something was different. The dolls were gone, the figure gone, but the feeling of dread remained. I tried to stand, but my body felt wrong. My skin was cold, too cold, and when I looked down at my hands, I saw them porcelain, cracked and bloodstained. My reflection in the broken glass confirmed what I already knew. I had become one of them. The clock struck midnight once again, and the dolls in the house turned their heads to watch me. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Weeping Mirror. It started on a night like any other. The chill of autumn had settled over the town, and the wind howled softly against the windows. I was alone, my footsteps echoing through the hallway as I headed to the bathroom. The dim light of the single bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the cracked tiles. The silence was comforting, in a way, the kind that comes when the world has finally wound down and left you to your thoughts. I stood in front of the mirror, my fingers tracing the edges of the cold porcelain sink. My face looked tired, worn out by the day's events, but there was something else. An unease had been brewing inside me, an itch at the back of my mind I couldn't quite scratch. As I splashed water over my face, the droplets felt colder than usual, biting against my skin. I kept my eyes closed, savoring the brief chill before grabbing the towel to dry off. When I opened my eyes and looked back at the mirror, that's when I saw it. My reflection, no, not mine, was different. It was me, but not quite. My lips were set in a grim line, my eyes filled with something distant, something sad. Yet, I wasn't sad. I was confused. I stared at the reflection, and it stared back, but it wasn't mimicking my movements. As I wiped my face with the towel, the reflection stood still, hands pressed against the sink, staring down at its feet. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the light, some optical illusion, but then something happened that turned my blood to ice. My reflection slowly lifted its head, its eyes filled with tears, which streamed down its face in steady, silent lines. I hadn't been crying. My heart raced, and I dropped the towel in shock. The mirror me wasn't washing away sweat or water, it was washing away tears. Is this real? I whispered, stepping closer to the glass. The reflection's lips trembled, but no sound escaped them. The tears kept falling, staining the collar of its shirt, a shirt identical to mine. My hand reached out to the mirror, trembling as my fingers brushed against the cold surface. I half expected to feel something, a pulse, a sign that the figure in the glass was more than a simple reflection. But it remained just that, cold, unyielding glass. Yet, the tears kept falling, and a deep, guttural sorrow seemed to radiate from the reflection. I could feel it pulling at me, drawing me closer. Suddenly, the room felt suffocating. I stumbled backward, knocking over the towel rack as I scrambled out of the bathroom. My chest heaved with each breath as I slammed the door shut behind me. The weight of the silence pressed down on me again, but this time it felt oppressive, as though something was watching. Something was waiting. I stood there, frozen in place, my back against the door, listening for any movement. But there was nothing. No sound from the bathroom, no footsteps, no voices. Just the faint, eerie whisper of the wind against the window. My reflection's tears. They weren't mine. What had I just seen? Who had I just seen? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection's face, wet with tears, staring at me with that haunting, hollow sadness. I could feel its pain, as though it had clawed its way through the glass and into my very soul. The silence of the house was overwhelming, the kind that makes you feel like you're never truly alone, even when you should be. Morning came, and the sunlight crept through the blinds, casting thin lines of light across the room. The normalcy of the day outside felt like a mockery of the terror I'd experienced the night before. Still, I couldn't bring myself to go back to the bathroom. I didn't want to see it again, didn't want to face the reflection that wasn't my own. But the pull was undeniable. As much as I feared it, I needed to understand. Something had changed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a bad dream. Around midday, I forced myself to confront the mirror. My hand hovered over the door handle, hesitating, but I knew I had to open it. The moment the door creaked open, I was hit by an overwhelming sense of dread. The bathroom was exactly as I had left it. Nothing seemed out of place, except for one thing. The mirror was fogged up, though the shower hadn't been used since the night before. I stepped in, cautiously approaching the sink. The glass was streaked with condensation, but behind the fog, I could make out the faint outline of my reflection. I wiped a section of the mirror clean with my sleeve, my heart pounding in my chest. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal. I moved my hand, and my reflection mimicked it perfectly. I exhaled in relief. Maybe I'd imagined everything. maybe the sleepless night had twisted my memory of what had happened. But just as I was about to turn away, I saw it again. This time, I didn't move, but my reflection did. Slowly, deliberately, its hand reached up to touch the glass from the other side, leaving a faint, foggy handprint as it pressed against the surface. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Its mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, as though it were trying to tell me something from deep within the mirror's surface. My pulse quickened as I leaned closer, desperate to understand. What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. My reflection's lips continued to move silently. The tears had returned, streaking down its face. This time, though, there was something else, its eyes. They weren't just sad, they were pleading, begging. It mouthed the word again and again, its expression growing more desperate with each attempt. "Help," I finally deciphered. "Help me." A surge of panic shot through me, and I stumbled backward, knocking a glass bottle off the counter. It shattered on the floor, the sound snapping me out of my terrified trance. I blinked, and when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was normal again, mimicking my every movement. But the handprint remained, a foggy reminder of what I'd just witnessed. I scrambled out of the bathroom, my heart racing, my mind spinning. Who was that? What did it want? The face had been mine, but the desperation, the anguish, it wasn't mine. I didn't know what was happening, but I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. That night, I stayed as far away from the bathroom as I could. I locked the door to my bedroom, pulled the covers up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the house as it settled in the dark. But even though I tried to shut it out, I could still feel the reflection's presence. It was like a shadow lingering in the corners of my mind, watching, waiting for me to return. And in the dead silence of the night, I thought I heard something. Faint, but unmistakable. A whisper. The whisper lingered in my mind, a ghostly echo that refused to leave. Each night since, it had grown louder, more insistent. I could no longer sleep. The faint sound of my reflection's plea would creep into my room, filling the dark corners with its mournful cry. It was always the same, "Help me." Days passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the reflection was watching me, even when I wasn't near the bathroom. No matter where I went, I felt its eyes on me, its presence lurking behind every reflective surface I walked by. A flash in a window. A shimmer in a glass door. It was as if the reflection had broken free of its prison in the mirror, following me wherever I went. I began avoiding mirrors altogether, covering the ones in my house, refusing to look into them. It felt childish, but I knew what I had seen wasn't a dream. It was real, and the reflection was trying to reach out, to pull me into something deeper, darker. But I couldn't ignore it forever. The whispers grew louder, no longer just at night. They followed me into the day, creeping into my mind during the quietest moments. It wasn't until the third night that everything changed. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling when I heard it again. The whisper wasn't faint anymore. It was loud, clear, and desperate. "Help me." I bolted upright, heart pounding. The sound wasn't coming from inside my head, it was coming from the bathroom. The door, which I had left closed, now stood ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me in. A cold breeze seemed to pour from it, making the air thick and heavy. I knew I shouldn't go in, but something inside me, a pull I couldn't resist, forced my feet out of bed. I needed to know the truth. With shaking hands, I pushed the door open and stepped into the bathroom. The mirror was fogged again, even though the room was cold. But this time, the fog wasn't natural. It swirled and shifted on its own, forming shapes, shadows moving just beyond the glass. I stood frozen, watching the fog until it cleared slightly, revealing my reflection once more. But this time, the reflection wasn't crying. It was staring at me with a twisted grin, eyes wide with a terror that wasn't my own. And then, slowly, its lips began to move, the words scraping out in a voice that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. "You ignored me," it hissed. "You saw me, and you left me here. I stumbled backward, my hand clutching the doorframe for support. "What are you?" I gasped, my voice barely more than a whisper. The reflection's grin widened, its eyes darkening into something hollow, empty. "I was you," it said, its voice growing louder, more distorted. "But now, I'm something else. You left me behind. You let me die." I shook my head, trying to make sense of what it was saying. "Left you behind? I don't understand. What do you want from me?" The reflection pressed its hands against the inside of the glass, as if trying to push through. "I want what you took," it growled. "I want to be free." The mirror began to tremble, vibrating violently on the wall. Cracks spidered out from the center, the glass warping and bending. I backed away, heart hammering in my chest as the reflection's form twisted, its features warping into something monstrous, inhuman. The thing in the mirror wasn't me anymore, it was something darker, something that had been trapped for far too long. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a deep, rumbling growl filled the room. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I was trapped. My eyes darted to the mirror, now cracked and splintering, but the reflection was gone. Instead, a voice, deep and ancient, whispered from behind the glass. "I'm not done with you yet." The bathroom closed in on me. My breath came in shallow gasps as the walls seemed to narrow, suffocating, pulling me closer to the broken mirror. The cracks in the glass expanded, crawling outward like dark veins. I could hear the voice again, deep and distorted, echoing from beneath the surface. "I was you. You left me here. You forgot." The mirror shuddered violently, fragments breaking away and scattering across the sink. I tried to move, to back away from the growing sense of dread pressing in on me, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The air in the room grew cold, bone-chilling, and I could see my breath in the dim light. The shattered pieces of glass reflected something that wasn't there, shadows, twisting forms that writhed just beyond the surface, crawling toward me from the other side. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of terror. There was no response, just a low, guttural growl rising from the mirror. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, movement. Something was slithering out from the cracks in the glass, inching its way toward me. Long, spindly fingers, black as ink, grasped the edges of the frame, pulling the figure into view. My reflection, or what was left of it, was emerging from the mirror. Its face was twisted into a grotesque mockery of my own, the skin pale and stretched too tight, eyes hollow and gleaming with malice. "I want to switch," it rasped, its voice no longer just in my head. "You left me here, abandoned me, but I'm taking it all back now." Panic surged through me as the creature dragged itself from the mirror, its limbs impossibly long, its body dripping with black, oily fluid. The smell hit me, a rancid, decaying stench that filled my lungs, making me gag. I backed into the corner of the room, my hands clawing at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The thing was free, and there was nowhere left to run. The reflection grinned, its teeth sharp and jagged as it approached. "You see, I've been waiting. Every time you looked into me, you left a part of yourself behind. And now I'm whole again. I don't need you anymore." Its voice grew darker, more malicious with every word. I screamed, slamming my fists against the door, praying for it to give way, but the house felt like it had come alive, trapping me here with this creature. The light overhead flickered again, casting long, twisted shadows across the room as the reflection reached out its hand. I could feel the cold radiating off it, sinking into my skin like ice. "You belong here now," it whispered, inches from my face. "I'll take your place." Without thinking, I grabbed the broken shard of mirror on the sink and swung it wildly, connecting with the creature's face. A horrible screech filled the room as the shard sliced through its flesh, black ichor spraying across the floor. But the reflection didn't fall back. Instead, it laughed, a sick, distorted sound that echoed in my skull. "You think you can fight this?" it hissed. "You think you can escape? You're already mine." My hand shook as I held the shard, but I knew I couldn't fight it off forever. Desperate, I lunged toward the mirror, pressing the shard back into the broken surface. The reflection shrieked in pain, its twisted foam rippling, distorting as the glass began to pull it back in. The room shook, the walls groaning under some unseen pressure as the creature fought against the pull, but I didn't let go. I pushed harder, screaming as the reflection clawed at me, dragging its nails across my arm. With one final, ear-splitting wail, the reflection was yanked back into the mirror, disappearing into the cracks. The bathroom fell silent, the air heavy and thick. I collapsed to the floor, my chest heaving as I stared at the now broken and empty mirror. My reflection was gone, the glass nothing more than a shattered, lifeless surface. But as I sat there, trembling in the dark, I heard a soft whisper, almost inaudible, from deep within the cracks of the mirror. "I'll be back." The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.